Good day, my beautiful children. Today is Tuesday, April the 7th, and we're continuing with our discussion here of television. So, when TV was first introduced uh, to the United States, it took a while, like any kind of new technology, for it to be mainstream and get affordable enough for the majority of people to own one. And you got to remember, too, at the beginning of this, it's not like today where you turn on the channel and there's always something on. When TV was first created, they were doing everything from scratch. So even if you owned a TV, uh, there wasn't much on to begin with. Everything was first run, whatever they could create on the fly. But by the 1960s, pretty much everybody had a television. And this is when we have the three major networks: ABC, CBS, and NBC, that all had programming that ran from usually 8 o'clock in the morning until about 1 o'clock at night. Uh, but anyway, once TV became mainstream, it did have an impact on a lot of things. For example, uh, the Buggles video "Killed the Radio Star" song. That's real. Uh, Television effectively killed the golden age of radio dead on arrival. People would much rather watch what was something in front of them than they would just sit and listen. And you know that. I mean, that's how it is for us today. A lot of you talked about how difficult it was for you to sit and listen to some of those radio programs that I put out. Um, so yeah, the golden age of radio dead, killed by television. And on the, I guess, on the plus side, a lot of the radio programs that were very popular, many of them moved on to television, and a lot of the talent, the actors, the writers, directors, and things of those radio programs went on and started working in television. So there was a lot of crossover there. Uh, Second thing, people stopped reading. Magazine subscriptions went way down. Newspaper subscriptions went way down because now we have the nightly news and programs to watch on TV, and so people stop reading. I don't need to explain that to you guys. Many of you don't read very much, and that's just television and things like that. We've become so visual. We'd much Most of us would much rather watch something on TV than sit and read about it. And then movies. When we get to our film unit, we'll talk about this. But um, movies, Hollywood predates TV by several decades. And what television did is, instead of getting dressed up, putting on pants and things like that, and going into town to go watch a movie, people would much rather sit at home on their couch for free and watch television. Maybe not much rather, or maybe not all the time, but yeah, I mean, given the choice between moving your carcass off the couch and going in and into town to watch a movie that costs money, people would much rather sit at home in their underpants and watch free television. So those are three areas that were dramatically and negatively impacted by the birth of television. All right, so we're going to start talking now about what it was like, what television was like in the beginning. And before we do that, I got to talk about how TV was sponsored. So because a lot of the people, or pretty much everybody that was working now in television, had got their start in radio, they took that radio model over to TV, and that included how things were paid for and sponsored. So in radio, one sponsor would sponsor one program, and then they would have complete control over that program. Well, that's exactly how they started doing it in television. Pretty much every show was sponsored by one single sponsor. So for example, Geritol, we're going to talk a lot about that company. They and the show that they sponsored. They sponsored a quiz show called 21, and Buick Cars had a variety show. Colgate toothpaste had a comedy show. So the that is not Corona, by the way. I just have a cough. Uh, that these sponsors would pay for all aspects of the show. Um, and that's okay, I guess. If you're Camel Cigarettes, you probably know a lot about selling cigarettes to people, but you might not know anything about making quality TV. And so that became an issue, and it became a major issue in a particular type of show, and we'll talk about that later. Um, but eventually, what's going to happen is NBC was the first network to force out single sponsors, and they did it really simply. They just made the shows longer. They made the shows. They took a show that was 15 minutes long, and that's early shows were like that. Early TV shows, just like early radio shows, were 15 minutes. Well, they made a 15-minute show 30 minutes, or they took a 30-minute show and made it an hour, and so that made it too expensive for one sponsor to pay for all of the costs of that show, and that led to us having the multiple sponsors like we see today with the commercial blocks of three commercials. The end result of this, and the good news for this, is that the networks took control of their shows instead of Geritol or Colgate toothpaste being in charge of a TV show. Now it was the network, and the networks knew a heck of a lot more about running television and making good TV shows than these advertising firms did. So let's talk about what early TV was like. And when I say early TV, I'm talking 1950s here. Um, Most of the shows were short, typically 15 minutes, exactly like the radio was. And I know you're thinking 15 minutes is not a lot of time. It's not. But if you take a 30-minute show today and you remove all the ads from it, you end up with about 21, 22 minutes of programming, and that's not that much longer than 15. So eventually, in the 50s, changes in the way that they did broadcasting and programming led to more network control. Like I mentioned, NBC changed their 15-minute shows to be at least 30 minutes. They changed the 30-minute shows to run at least an hour. And that took control from the sponsors and gave it back to the networks. We also have what are called magazine style shows. And magazine shows are called that because just like if you get a magazine, like People or Time or Vogue or whatever you guys read. When you open it up, it has multiple segments in it. It's got a special interest segment, it might have something on sports, maybe something on entertainment. That's what magazine shows are like. They're longer shows and they have multiple segments that are like kind of compartmentalized and separated, and they last much longer than a regular show. So the first show of this kind was the Today Show, and the Today Show lasted for 3 hours. And the idea behind this was um, today we have 24-hour programming. So you turn the TV on, there's always going to be something on. That's not how it was in the 1950s. Actually, it wasn't even like that when I was your age. When I was in high school, I get home from going out and being out with my friends and just basically killing it, as you guys might say. And I get home on a Saturday night and I'd watch usually a little bit of Saturday Night Live, which ended at 1 o'clock, and then there'd be like a half-hour video show, and then they would play the national anthem, and they would put the NBC Peacock on the screen, and then that's how it would stay until like 7 o'clock the next morning. So they didn't run programming 24/7 like they do today. So the idea was with the Today Show, hey, we've got this block of time from like 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. every morning. Let's throw something on TV. I bet people will watch it. And they were exactly right. So they put this show on, and the picture here is of the first host of the Today Show. It's a guy named Dave Garroway. And if you watch some of the early Today shows, they're awful. It's like watching paint dry. He sits at that desk and he reads the news straight from the paper. He reads books online or on air. Um, it's terribly boring, but the gamble was if we put this on, somebody's going to watch it. And by God, they were right. If there's something on TV, we'll watch it. How many times have you guys been up at 4 a.m. watching infomercials or whatever? Um, so it worked. And so when it worked for NBC, the other networks copied it. We had Good Morning America and other shows. And then they decided to also bookend these and put them on late at night. So Today's Show was on NBC in the morning, and then at night, The Tonight Show, which lasted 90 minutes. And that's still how it works today. Every network has morning shows, and every network has late night shows. Um, They also had what were called spectaculars. So a spectacular is exactly what it sounds like. It was meant to be something that was giant and tremendous and great. And the idea was that they were going to guarantee advertisers millions and millions of viewers, so they could charge them an arm and a leg to to advertise for the show. So they would do things like made for TV movies like Richard III, starring Laurence Olivier, who was a really famous actor, or they did a live broadcast of Peter Pan starring Mary Martin, or they would do variety hours. They have like the Dean Martin Variety Hour where they would advertise that Dean Martin was going to be on, or Frank Sinatra, or some famous singer, and they would have all their friends from Hollywood Hollywood come in and perform. And so millions of people would tune in to watch this, and they would charge a ton of money to advertisers for doing this. You don't see this much every day, or as much today, and the reason is we're all over the map with our TV viewing. You cannot guarantee millions of viewers to anybody because of how many channels there are, and because of the way that we access television anymore. How many of you, record TV so you could skip through commercials, and the advertisers know that. Um, there's one exception, and the one exception to the rule is obviously the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl, they guarantee, millions and millions of people will watch, and a lot of people watch it just for the ads, for the commercials, and so they can charge millions of dollars for a 30-second TV spot because they can guarantee those advertisers all the viewers that are going to sit and watch it. They've also started, the thing about pop culture is it's cyclical. Everything comes around eventually again. And so they have been doing some of this, some of these spectaculars lately. Uh, I don't think not so much because they can guarantee a bunch of viewers. I think it's just more for like the nostalgia aspect of it. But they did The Sound of Music live. They did Hairspray live. They did. Um, Peter Pan live. So they're starting to do this again. Um, but the viewing, the ratings haven't been great for it. Not like they were in the 1950s and 60s, at least. All right, we're going to stop there, mostly because if I make a video that lasts longer than 15 minutes, I can't put it on YouTube, which is ridiculous. So that's it for today. And when we come back tomorrow with this, we're going to pick up with the quiz show scandals of the 1950s. Something that most of you probably have never heard of, but that's really interesting and changed the way that TV today would not be like it is today if it weren't for the quiz show scandals of the 1950s. So we'll get into that tomorrow and talk a little bit about that. Okay, that's it. Peace.